Big crowd starting off. I'm gonna get going with everything in about a minute or two, but I want people to filter in. But until then, I love to hear about like where people are calling in from. I'm in Hawaii right now. I have no basis in Hawaii. I'm just like living here, working for a month. So for some of you, I know it's like 6 p.m. on the Eastern time. It's 3 p.m. I think California. It's noon for me. So I'd love to see where you guys are from. So if you wouldn't mind just dropping that in the chat, feel free to throw that in there. Yeah, let's see if we got any faves in here. Lilburn, Georgia. I am from Lilburn, Georgia. That's insane. You're my favorite person. Whoever put that in. Atlanta. Also Atlanta. SF. I go to Stanford, so I'm nearby. Austin, Texas. My low-key opinion, best city in the United States, right? We can talk about that. And Phoenix. Okay, stay alive. It's like 105, I think. Oh, so yeah, Michigan. Underrated state. New York, a lot of New York. Minnesota, we got Tim Walls calling in. Amsterdam, well, okay, we're going international. Out to 119 in your car. Wow, okay, maybe you should maybe get out of the car. You don't need to be on this call. Protect your safety first. Okay. Okay, we're a couple minutes in, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. If we can just go to the next slide, Amanda. Thank you. So welcome everyone. This is an AMA for law school admissions. My name is Machmud M. I'm a JD MBA candidate over at Stanford. I really want to use most of this time to really get to your questions, but I just want to start off by giving a little background about myself. So I went to college over at Oberlin in Ohio. I don't know if we have any Ohio people here, but I went over there and played baseball over there. I was very lucky. I was able to earn a Rhodes Scholarship to go over to Oxford and then started working for a while. My background and interests are really in politics and policy. And so was on a couple different campaigns, ended up over at the Biden campaign for the last one, and then was over at the White House when we won for about a year and a half. At that point, I was super tired and kind of burnt out and figured I should probably get on with my life and go to law school like I'd planned, probably similar position to a lot of you. So I went ahead and applied. And then actually this last year while I was in law school, I won't talk about it much now, but I can talk about it if anyone has a question about it. I decided to also add on the MBA. So it throws on one more extra year for me. So at some point, I promise I'll stop going to school and get on with my life and get a real job. But that's a bit of my pre-work experience background. And so right now I'm a coach over at Leland. So I help people out with their law school admissions process, MBA admissions process, general kind of career planning around the law, public policy, politics, just given that that's my background. But have been really excited. I started, I think, in March with Leland and have worked so far with, I think, 35 different clients, both on a full-time package basis as well as hourly. So if you guys want to learn more about what I do on Leland, if you just scan the QR code here, you can see my profile, book time, and we can kind of go from there. But that's all boring. I want to talk about your questions and see what you have in mind. So I'm happy to talk about anything just to kind of provide some kind of framing points. If you have anything in particular about, baseline, should I go to law school? What is it good for? How do I decide what do I apply to? What does the timeline look like? Preparing for the LSAT, essays, recs, nothing is off limits. What do I do day to day? What do I do to work out? Whatever questions you got, it's open game. So the way I want to do this, I hate just kind of talking to a screen and feel like I'm getting nothing back. So if anyone has a question, feel free to raise your hand. You don't have to be on camera. Some of you are in your cars in 119 degrees, so you got to survive first. So I'll just go with people as they raise their hands in order. If we get to a point where we run out of hands, I'll just go to the chat if anyone has questions there, and we can kind of go from there. So, okay, we got our first person, Sav.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for this session. Really appreciate it. My question here is I'm going to law school to combine my previous non-law experiences with law. And I was wondering, is it bad if I have no law experience to talk about in my application? Like, is someone who says, I want to do XYZ law, and they've actually dabbled in some aspect of that XYZ law, do they look better than someone else who says, I want to do that law? I haven't ever done it before, but I want to do it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for the question. Very good question. I think relevant to a lot of people. So good answer is no. You do not need any kind of explicit experience within the law related to whatever you want to do. the thing is, you do need to be able to tie it to law school. So really your personal statement is where you're going to flesh out your story as to why you're going and who you are before. So when I think about personal statement, I really think about it in three parts. Number one, like, who are you foundationally? And I mean that in like kind of a sappy way. Like, why do you wake up every day? Why is it that you think the way you do? Why do you spend your time doing what you do? For most people, that's something that either happened to them or circumstances surrounding their childhood, their family, something about how they grew up, right? Like, you have a set of values, you want to do something, you're clearly motivated, ambitious, you're here on this call, you're applying to law school. So tell the story of how is it that you got into whatever you got into and how you arrived at your values. Number two, kind of the second part is like, how did you make that happen in the world? And maybe how did you change your mind? So for most people, it's thinking about like, what kind of a work experience do I have, either full-time or in school? How did I kind of tease out and try to manifest what I think is important in the world? Maybe you succeeded in that. That's great. Maybe you failed. Like, I failed most of the times that I tried to do something new. So that's totally okay as well. And these kinds of topics don't have to be related to the law necessarily. It can be something with science, with sports, with the military, but just something that shows a grounding and like a perspective and a set of values. But then number three, and this is where the law part comes in, it has to make sense why you're going to law school, right? Because at the end of the day, you're going to get trained as a lawyer. So let me just take the example of someone who, let's say, has an engineering background and they're working on developing a number of different like software applications. And now they're at the point where they really care about like the IP protections around that. And so that's a clear case where it's like, you don't necessarily have experience in the law, but there's a linkage to a legal job that you want to work in that you can tie into it. So long story short, no, you don't have to have explicit experience with the legal question that you want to go into, but you do have to be able to speak to your background in a way that makes sense and leads naturally into why you're going to law school. Thank you for the question. That's a great question. Next, I'll go to Janae.
Hi. So my
Hey.
question is, what do you think in your personal statement, what are topics or things you should stay away from that would be common against most people that wouldn't really make you stand out to a school?
Yeah, I think the most common one I see, and maybe I hope I don't hurt anyone's feelings if you're thinking about this, but the kind of generic, my parents always told me I should be a lawyer because I like to argue. It's not cute. It's not really relevant to actually being a lawyer. There's actually not that much arguing depending on what you end up doing. So I think general, like when I say you were a kid and came to this idea, it is more of a kind of values driven approach. And so let's say you were in an environment where you were around some kind of inequality or injustice and you want to speak to that and use the law to rectify that. I think that's totally fair game. But something about like, I like to argue, I like to compete, I like to win, things that seem adversarial for the sake of being adversarial and not towards the end of advancing some kind of broader goal. Those are the kinds of things that I would stay away from. Other than that, I really think like the way to think about it is to not, because you guys are probably all looking online on like sample essays, and you'll see that there are kind of templates for like, I did XYZ thing, it was very legal in undergrad, and now I want to go to law school. The way I'll think about this essay is you're not trying to fit into a stereotype for what you think the admissions committee wants. You want to tell the story that only you can tell about your life as authentically as you can. And I know people that came from like a Broadway actress background and went to law school. I know people who were engineers. I know people who were military officers, and their essays maybe felt a little risky because they were super different than what everyone else was talking about, but they were super authentic to them. And ultimately, those are the ones that end up carrying the most weight. So I hope that helps a bit.
Thank you.
Of course. Next, I hope I'm not saying this incorrectly as someone with a tough name myself. Is it Aitana?
Hi, Aitana.
Aitana. Hey.
Thank you for hosting this. My initial question was all about the LSATs, but I assume that someone else is going to ask about that. So my burning question underneath was about how you tacked on your MBA, because that's that I'm interested in doing. So what I've read so far online and at admissions offices at various schools is that you apply separately to both schools, but what comes after that, and also what comes before that?
Correct. So I'll talk a little about my process and then I'll talk about the general process because I was in a bit of a weird situation. So with me, I did not apply at the same time. I was in law school for almost 2 years at that point, and then I applied during literally like the last possible month that I could have done so to still do the joint program. The vast majority of people that do a joint program like this, whether it's JD MBA or JD Masters, JD MPP, whatever it may be, you're usually going to apply at the same time. So in that situation, yes, you were filling out two separate applications. And it's kind of weird because on the one hand, they kind of have nothing to do with one another. Like you have to take the relevant tests. They look for slightly different things. And so you have to be in accordance with whatever like the standard is for that school. But for most of them, you're also going to have to speak to the fact that you were trying to be a JD MBA candidate. And so having some kind of answer for why is it that I need both of these degrees is important. In my case, it came relatively easy because I was already in law school. I kind of saw what being a lawyer was going to look like. I had a bit of a different background coming in already because I had a pretty like heavy policy and politics focus. But what I did my 1L is I started a nonprofit focused on voting rights. I ended up serving as chief of staff to a state rep back in Georgia. Through those experiences, I just found that I was really a lot better and I was enjoying a lot more doing more entrepreneurial things. And so was thinking about making a pivot towards social entrepreneurship. So having the legal component is important because I still want to be involved in the policy world. And so I can learn all the relevant things I need to learn substantively from that. But what I wanted to get from the MBA was kind of more the management skills for how you guide a social impact startup. So for me, it kind of fit in as to why I was going, but I think the clearest thing is to make sure you're answering the question, why do you want to go to law school and why do you want to go to business school? Both of those have to be answered clearly. Okay, next, of course. Next, we got another tough name. I'm sorry. Is it Farin?
It's Farine.
Farine. Sorry about that. Thanks for coming.
Right. So my question was about the application process. I have an LSAT score on file, but I'm also registered for the September LSAT. Would you recommend because I know that they always say to apply early, like when applications open, should I apply with the score that I have on file? And then update it if the universities haven't looked at my application yet, and then update it later, or should I just wait until I get the September score back?
Yeah, that's a great question. So generally there is a small statistical benefit to applying within the first 6 weeks. So this is kind of that point where it's kind of an iffy question because it really depends on how it asks you kind of personally, like how you feel about the difference in score potentially between your first and second. If you're in a situation where you were preparing for the August one, you were taking a bunch of practice tests, your scores are increasing, but you didn't quite feel like you had enough time to hit your apex, then I'd say maybe let's wait and then submit the September one because there's not going to be that huge of a difference. Let's say if you get your score on September 29th and you submit that day, like that is fine. You're not late in any case. The bigger thing I would think about is I would never want you or anybody else to feel like you're rushing an application to hit a somewhat arbitrary deadline. Like, yes, there is an advantage to applying early. There is a bigger advantage to having your application ready, all of your essays perfected, all of your recs in and perfected, your resumes in the right spot. And that is worth more to me. And I think the statistics also bear this out. That is worth more in the process than you kind of throwing together something sloppily. Not saying that's what you're doing, but that's broadly how I would think about it. So I guess if you think that your scores are going to be maybe within 2 or 3 points, go ahead and send in the August. If you think that you're looking for a big jump, I would say go ahead and wait a little bit.
Thank you. I also had a follow-up question, if that's okay.
Sure.
It was a different question, but I know they took away the diversity statement, and they call it the statement of perspective and the statement of I'm not sure the other one, but how would you approach writing that? Is that any different from what we had in previous application cycles? How is that different from the personal statement?
Yeah. So your personal statement is kind of what I talked about before in terms of the 3 component parts, kind of establishing who are you in terms of your character, your values, how have you taken action on that, and then why does law figure in? The diversity perspective ones now are interesting because we're in this place where, I don't know, this is a broader commentary, kind of where we are in American life right now, but it is very unequal still, but at the same time, there are increasing number of minorities of all sorts who are applying to law school. And so you can fall into tropes of kind of telling the same story of everyone else. I think with the perspective ones, the biggest thing is number one, remain true to yourself. don't feel like you need to be saying something that's kind of a stereotype, even if it may be true just because other people are saying it. The bigger thing that I'm finding a lot of admissions committee people that I talk to say explicitly that they're looking for from these diversity statements is what are situations in which you have taken your perspective, which is unique, and you've had to work with people who have a different perspective or background. And I think that can take the form of like a hard conversation, being in a work environment or a school environment where you have to work with people who are different from you. And so you're bringing in that identity component, but it's really just not internal, it's more external. How are you taking that and engaging with other people and bringing about some kind of positive outcome? So that's what I think about that. Of
Thank you.
course. Next, Sarah Thomas.
Yes, so I'm still in the process of like planning to take the LSAT next year, and I know little to nothing about law school admissions and what they look at. And I was wondering if you had to point out in a bullet point format what you would recommend for someone who doesn't really know. I'll be admitted, I don't really know what I'm doing with that because I haven't done it and I haven't looked deep enough into it. But I would like to get your perspective on it in a bullet point setup, just to be brief so I don't take up too much time for others.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think the number one question is like, should you go, right? And that's kind of a longer conversation, but the biggest thing I would keep in mind there is like, do you see yourself being happy as doing something that is specifically a legal function? As someone who came from a policy background, there's a lot of overlap with the law. I often actually caution people against going because let's say you really care about, I'm making this up, it's just like advocacy in the environmental space. Like there's a lot of cool jobs you can make an impact doing that through policy, through politics, through a nonprofit that don't require a legal degree. And so I'd say like get to the point where you feel like I really need to go to law school and become a lawyer to do the work I want to do. Once you've made that decision, I'd say in terms of component parts, this whole thing is probably very scary. I know you guys are on this call, like you maybe are freaked out about the process. It's relatively straightforward and kind of simple in terms of the component parts. There's 7 parts: LSAT, GPA/transcript, your personal statement, supplementary essays, resume, letters of rec, and the actual application form. Of those, your LSAT and your GPA are going to set the table for about 75% of your application. Like I feel pretty confident telling you within like 90% accuracy where you're probably going to get in just based off of those 2 numbers. It's an unfortunate reality, but that is just a big part of this process. After that, I'd say the second biggest thing is like, what is your story and why are you going? And that is something like once we've identified what the thesis is on that, you make that play out in the personal statement, you guide your recommenders to play up that story, you do the supplemental one to augment that story. So it's really kind of the numbers and the narrative. If I was going to put it in one bullet point, those are the 2 words that I would use. But also happy, I mean, through Leland, there's a lot of coaches, you can book an intro call to kind of talk through your specific situation with a little more detail. Okay, let's go to Caroline.
Hi, so thank you so much for doing this for us. I had a question about like the resume. I just graduated from my undergrad and I'm looking back on like all my experiences, my jobs, and I've had a bunch of different jobs, a bunch of different internships and leadership positions, and I'm scared that I'm gonna look like scattered. Like,
Yeah.
is there any advice you have where like I could take some things out or if it's not an issue?
Yeah. I guess the real fundamental question there, not to put you on the spot, but is like, are you scattered? And if you are, that's okay. Like I had a super weird background where like I played sports in college, but I did a lot of political stuff. I also taught a bit. I was into environmental sustainability work in particular. Also an immigrant and like the middle of the South. So there's like a lot of different component parts all of you can pull from your life to highlight. I'd say the biggest thing is number one, I often work with my clients to just like, before we even start writing the essay, do like a free write of your life. And like some people take 4 pages, some people take like 30. But it's like, as you're breaking down all the different things that are important to you, whether it's the stuff you've done in school, full-time work, your family, some of those values questions that we talked about, like where those come from, like sketch out the stories of what all that is grounded in. And then I would start to tie together, like maybe if it's something like you're really into I don't know, I'm making this up, but like, let's say you're really into politics and you played football growing up, and like a through line you see there is like teamwork to accomplish some kind of broader goal. Like that can be the thesis that you build out to tie between the things. I would say for your personal statement, like it's actually pretty short. It's 2 pages, double spaced. So effectively it's 1 page of text. You don't have room to put every single thing. So what I would do if you have many things that are kind of across the board, pick the ones that tie together into the narrative as well as possible and focus the essay on that. And then you can use the supplemental, you can use the letters of rec to play up the kind of supplementary parts, because it's good to have like a diversity of backgrounds. Like they want people who are interesting and have done many things. But in terms of the essay, you want to tell a clear story. And so if that means focusing on just like 1 or 2 things among the whole roster of stuff you have going on, that would be how I feel about it.
Thank you so much. That helped me a lot.
Of course. Next we got Sana.
Hi, thank you so much for doing this again. I really appreciate it, as everyone's already said. But I had a question about financial aid and admissions. So in undergrad, my family's estimated contribution was 0. And for the year that I'm applying for law school, I have an opportunity to get a salaried job, but I don't really have any savings and my family is still like low income. So do you think that having a job the year before law school would in fact like impact my financial aid significantly? Because some people have said it is, and I'm just like kind of anxious because my background's really the same. It's just that now I have like a opportunity after so long.
Yeah, if it's 1 year, so basically what they do is they're going to look at your assets over the past 4 years, as well as your family's assets. So if it's just 1 year, and I'm guessing you're not going to, maybe you're going to a hedge fund for a year and you're going to make a shit ton of money, but like maybe not. So if it's just 1 year, I wouldn't worry about it. And in particular, if you're in a situation where you receive significant aid during college, then you are likely to be in the same situation for law school. Generally, I will say there's a little less generosity because law schools are looking for you to take on debt because they understand that you will probably have opportunities to pay it back very quickly afterwards. And so it's not always the case like you take on no debt in undergrad. That's going to be the case in law school, if that makes sense. But this kind of plays out very differently between different schools. So broadly, what I'd say is kind of like an admissions focus on this. Let's say you want to go to like Duke. It's like your dream school. What I would tell you at that point, then, is like apply to Duke, but also apply to UVA, apply to Berkeley, apply to the peer schools, because a big thing that happens is like you will be able to negotiate your financial aid because they want you to come once you get in, right? But the thing is, you have to be able to compare the school that you're actually wanting to go to against peer schools. They don't care about lower ranked schools. And in the case of like the top, like the Harvard, Yale, Stanfords, like they don't care at all. So they're not going to negotiate it, right, against other places. But for the lower ranked ones, like you will be able to do that.
So sorry, am I in a better position not taking it for financial aid? Like, for example, like not taking it at all, it's the status has been the same versus taking it and having that in that 4 years, 1 year I worked. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So first of all, I would say I would not make the decision based off of financial aid. I think like the whether or not to take a year and work is kind of a bigger picture question that I get. It's important to like think about as part of the process, but I wouldn't make that the main driver just because I significantly doubt that it's going to change the amount that you get, especially if you're not making a lot of money in that 1 year. But again, like the actual answer to your question really depends on what school you're talking to and what the other options are. So not to be a cop-out, but I just want to make sure I'm being accurate. There's no like dispositive answer on your question. Like you have to kind of apply to all the places you're applying, see where you get in. It's also going to depend on what your LSAT is, how much merit money are they giving you? Is this even a school that gives you merit money? So there's a lot of variables that just I don't feel as comfortable saying like, if you do this, this will happen, if that makes sense. Okay, before we get to questions, I just want to pivot real quick to a boot camp that we're offering here at Leland. And the reason I'm saying it on this call is because one person on this call, if you fill out this form, which I think Amanda is either dropping or about to drop in the chat, is going to be able to go to this boot camp for free. So let me just give a bit of an overview about what this is real quick. So as I mentioned on Leland, we have coaches that work with clients full-time, full packages, or they work on hourly basis. What the boot camp does is it takes a lot of that seminal information. It brings you together with a cohort, a very small cohort of other people who are also applying to law school. And it does so at a much more competitive price than what you would get from a full-time package or an hourly package even. I also like with this element, like sometimes it can feel kind of lonely, like applying on your own. Obviously, you have your coach or whoever else you're talking to, but here you have a built-in cohort where you guys can talk to one another. You have a bit of camaraderie over the experience, and I've always found that kind of environment helpful. So, talking about this boot camp, we have 5 sessions. Sorry, if we can just go back real quick. There's 5 sessions. These are kind of the subject matter things that we're focusing on over the course of about a month. It coincides really well with the beginning of the cycle. So, if you're someone who's thinking about applying right now and you haven't really got it started and you're really looking for some more intensive one-on-one feedback, this is a great way to go. We can go to the next slide, maybe. Yeah, so this is just a bit of an overview of what you can be looking like. Like I said, it's over the course of about a month. We have live interaction, a lot of peer-to-peer. We'll be having homework. I know you don't want more homework, but a lot of this stuff is important. So we want to make sure that you're in the best position possible to apply. Another thing, Leland Plus, that's a huge kind of online content library where there's resumes, sample templates. You can plug around through that, so you get access to that through it. So together, all estimated, the value of all this is about $2,600. If you sign up right now with the link that I think Amanda's already dropped in, or she's about to, you can get it for $500. So that's only today. And there's one person on this call. If you fill out the little survey, one person's going to get this for free. So make sure to enter that, and I'll announce who that person is at the end. So I'll just give you a second to grab that link and sign up for that lottery. Okay.
I appreciate your time. I'm actually going to have to hop off just because my lunch at work is over. I just want to thank you for taking the time to have this meeting.
No, of course. And if anyone has to hop off, this recording is going to get sent out, I think, pretty soon. It's a YouTube clip, so you'll be able to get that and watch the rest. And you'll be getting more emails about free events that I'll be doing and other folks too. So, okay, let's go back to our questions. Let's go to Megan.
So my question was, if the subject for an addendum essay is adversity, is it better to discuss like multiple ways you've dealt with adversity in your life, or is it better to focus on like one main story and make that the point of the whole essay?
I think this really, I mean, not to be a cop-out again, it really depends. I think I'll just take like an example, like my family didn't grow up with a lot of money. We also didn't know English growing up. And so there were challenges around like, how do you fill out forms for like public assistance? How do you figure out how you're going to get to work when you don't have a car? How do you like get jobs when you don't know anyone and you don't speak English? And so like all those things are separate iterations, but manifestations of the same problem, which is just like being an immigrant, not having a lot of money in America. So in some ways, it's like if there are multiple component parts, but they're grounded in the same underlying root cause, then I think it can make sense. But I think I would worry if they're very different. You just don't have a lot of space with these essays, and you want to be able to drive home like a clear narrative. And so again, it kind of depends on the particular situation you're talking about. But I would keep some thought to like, you don't want to stretch your story too thin. You want to tell it authentically and make connections where they exist, but we don't want to make kind of random leaps. At the same time, like let's say there are 2 pretty disparate things, but they prevented you or like made a particular facet of your life like uniquely challenging, then that can work. But that kind of depends on like what exactly it is you're talking about and how the story is written. So I'm sorry I can't get more specific without knowing you, but I hope that's helpful at least.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. Let's go to Ella next.
Hi, thank you for making time. I have a 2-part or 3-part question. One regarding the essay and then on LSAT.
Yeah.
So with the addendum, I was wondering if you have advice on what not to say. I was told to not like trauma dump or say anything that makes it seem.
When you say the addendum, you mean just like the part at the end? It's like if you have any other info to share with us.
The supplementary.
Yeah.
Should I do the rest of my questions or would?
Yeah, let's just do that.
Okay. And then secondly, is it okay to talk about faith in our essays? Or can that be like biased based on reader? And then also, it's kind of hard for me to move on with like deciding what to write about because I feel as if the perspective essay or the diversity statement and the personal statement could go hand in hand, even though it kind of doesn't. But I'm kind of writing the same story. So any advice on how to split those two? And then I know you took some time off before school. I was just wondering, during your LSAT studying, how did you make time, or what was your schedule like?
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so for the first point about the addendum, so the addendum is generally, if people aren't familiar, it's where you provide supplemental information about context of the application. So generally what most people use that for is like if you have some kind of issue with like taking tests, or if your GPA was bad because something happened in your personal life that like made school really hard for a year, but then your grades improved and like otherwise you were fine. That is the place to provide that kind of context. I would not overuse it, and I wouldn't use it, for example, to just explain away like if you just weren't good at chemistry and you kept taking chemistry and then you majored in chemistry, well, like, sorry. But if you're like, hey, I took a bunch of pre-med classes because I thought it was gonna be pre-med, a semester in, I did an internship and I realized that actually I wanted to pursue the law. Once I started taking classes that were more germane to that, my GPA improved. Then like that can be an appropriate use of that space. Number two, on the religion point, I think about this the same way as it would be like politics or any kind of deeply held personal belief. I think as long as you are not coming across as, how do I say this? Like combative or like defensive, like anyone's personal belief, like they want to have people with a range of different kinds of beliefs. It's more so, are you coming across in such a way that like you're going to be someone who contributes to the classroom in like a positive way, right? Like we all kind of know the people, like whether it's like politics or like any kind of issue, like they're very kind of sanctimonious about it. I'm not saying this is the case for you, but that is just like what I would try to stay away from. I know many people who lean into their faith, and like that is actually the reason that they go to law school. They want to work on the religious liberty issues, and so it's not a uncommon thing. Third question I'm forgetting. I'm going to go to the fourth and ask you about the third. The fourth one was about how I did the LSAT. So for me, I did it actually when I was in school, and I would highly recommend if you guys are still in school to do that. For those of you who are working right now, not to say you're cooked, you're not, but it is tougher, and you know it is just because you are working full time. But I took the GRE when I was applying for my MBA while I was working full time, and that was not fun. But basically what I did with the LSAT was I thought about it again in two parts. Number one, get the substance down. So with the substantive part, it's really just like drilling sections, going through YouTube. I use 7Sage a lot for question explanations, try to figure out like, am I actually getting why I'm getting things right or wrong? Am I able to make adjustments so that I can figure out substantively what the right answer is? The second part of it is really more about like the timing and the pacing, because it's kind of like you can know everything, but once you're in there and the time is ticking and you're tired and you're 2 hours in, that's almost a totally different situation. So I was in a spot where I took about a month to take a full-length practice test at the exact time I was going to take the actual test in the morning. Then I would take off lunch. In the afternoon, I would score and do a blind review to get all the questions I got wrong, to redo them until I got them right. So that helped me build that kind of endurance muscle. I want to come back to your third question. Can you remind me what it was?
Yeah, the personal statement and the
Oh yes, yeah, the consistency. So yeah, so it's a tough challenge because there are a lot of people in this category, so you're definitely not the only one thinking that. I think if there's something about your identity or like a diverse perspective that is like the basis of your life experience, then like that's totally fair game to run with. I would then maybe think about like as the perspective one, leaning less into the internal and more into the external, kind of like I said before about like, how is it that you've worked with people who are different from you? Could be a good basis for that. If you find that like your most compelling story is the kind of more diversity adjacent one, then definitely stick with that on the primary essay. Like that is the more important one. It may take some time to kind of like think through what is a part of that you can maybe like cleave off to leave on the perspective one, but that's very kind of broad advice. It would kind of depend on what your particular situation is, and I'd be interested in talking to you one-on-one to kind of figure that out, but generally that's how I think about it.
Thank you.
Okay. Who we got next? Did I just call on Ella? Yeah, I did. Okay, Sab, you're coming back, but I'm going to skip you because you already had one, so I'll come back to you. Let me go to Thea.
Thea, like a theory.
Yeah, Thea.
Hi, nice to meet you. Thank you for hosting this session. So this actually relates to the addendum question that you kind of touched on earlier. And during college, I had various events that were kind of dramatic, like to talk about, to give you a little spiel. My mother had 2 separate cancer scares, my freshman and my senior year. I was involved in this like potential lawsuit with a dangerous predator guy in like the local area with like 5 other girls who were trying to sue him, and I was going to testify if they tried to sue him. So I was like scared for my safety because he knew where I lived. And also I was navigating like not being diagnosed with ADHD, like figuring out medications behind my mother's back because it's not a thing apparently in my culture. I think you may be able to relate to that struggle as an immigrant as well. I wonder if like you have recommendations as to should I just focus on specific topics and what depth should I go to talk about them in my addendum? Because I truly don't think I have a GPA of about 3.66 to 3.68. It's not finalized just yet, but I don't think it's a good enough reflection of my abilities as a student and also not me in the workplace. Like I think I can do a lot better.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm sorry to hear that. It's definitely not easy to feel like you have to bring all that back up for the purpose of an application towards people that you don't even know. So what I'd say is like write about it to the extent that you feel comfortable. Keep the details limited to what is relevant for understanding why your situation was difficult as a result, right? Because I think another risk is like sometimes we go so much into the circumstances that just the general tenor of it, and this is kind of inevitable given what you're talking about, it's kind of negative, right? And what we want to do is like, I mean, your GPA is good. First of all, I'll just say, if you feel like it's still not representative, there's a way of spinning this, which gives it a bit of more of like a momentum crescendo. So we end with a bit of positive. So a focus on like, this is kind of what happened in my life. As a result, I really struggled as I had to be there for my family and kind of focus internally for a period of time, but that changed or like it ended or whatever it may be. And then my grades improved, or I kept a focus on doing this project, and these positive things keep happening. So basically, whichever way you write it, like you want to have a path towards them having faith that this is something that was limited in time and scope, right? Maybe that's not entirely true. Perhaps it still affects you now. And so like you have to be honest about that. But we want to create some kind of space for them to feel like, okay, this is something that happened. We see the result, but we also see the broader potential, and here's the evidence of that. If that makes sense. Of course. Okay, let's go to Sabrina.
Hi, I just want to say thank you for hosting this. And I guess I had a question. I'm a junior right now in college, so I'm not really confronted with the application of law school yet, but I was wondering regarding your process with taking the LSAT and taking time off before law school, how do you recommend approaching the LSAT? I know you mentioned to advise us to take it in school rather than when working full time, but I guess with tackling it and being first generation, I guess I just wanted your advice on how to tackle the entire process.
So this is where I think it's the most important thing is to figure out, this is going to sound really stupid, but the most important thing is to figure out how do you learn? Because there's some people like they really need a one-on-one tutor. I have never like felt that was particularly helpful for me on test things. There are other people that like they can't do that. They can only do group sessions, and so they'll have a group of 4 or 5 that they work with. There are other people like me. I just felt like if I'm not figuring out on my own, I'm not going to get it, right? So I think like that is the first thing. What kind of setting do you learn best in, specifically for something like a standardized test? Like this is a tough test, but the biggest thing I figured out about it is a very learnable one. And if you put in the time, you will improve from where you start, just because the questions they ask are not necessarily all the way intuitive. Like there are patterns you start to recognize just by putting in the time. So yeah, you were going to say something?
Yes, I wanted to also like add on to that. I guess I hear a lot of people saying that at a certain point in time, after you do study for a while, that there are diminishing returns, and you don't want to really, I guess, burn yourself out in that aspect. Do you have any recommendations on like a time frame that you do recommend?
I'll just say, I think the burnout thing is another thing. Like you kind of have to know yourself. Some people burn out, some people are just kind of lazy. And I hate to be kind of harsh about it, but that's just kind of how it is, right? Like there is a point where you're doing so much. I'm not saying like you need to be working on this 20 hours a day, but you have to have a plan of like, okay, I am tracking what I'm getting wrong. I'm getting this kind of question wrong. Let me look up on YouTube, whatever free resource or paid one, like whatever it may be, to figure out what those questions are about. And the good thing is like all this stuff is available for free. Like it takes a little more time to kind of dig through YouTube. 7Sage, I'll just drop again, is a great resource for that. But like figure out the types of questions that you're tripping up or whatever it is. Do them ad nauseum until you figure it out. Maybe that requires someone coming in to help. Like that may be the case. And so I'll lean into that. And then just like the repetition thing, I can't stress enough. Like there will be, this test has been done since like the early, I mean, a long time, but you have the publicly available test, official tests available from the early 90s. You can find all those online. So you can do the full length tests. And once you do enough, you will see, even without necessarily even reading through the entire question, just the way they set it up, you'll start to recognize the patterns. And that's where I say like putting in the time is really important. In terms of what the ideal time frame looks like if you're working full time, this may take like a year, you know, or it may take 3 months. If you're not working full time and you're in school and you have a little more flexibility in your schedule, like you can do it in a month. Like I really think that could be true if you if you carved out your time, you're being in the right place, you're able to identify where you're not doing well. Everyone's just kind of different. So I would start off for all of you, just take the diagnostic test, see where you are. A lot of it is going to seem foreign just because you haven't come across this type of question before. Do that and then can figure out the component parts of where you need to improve. So that's not a very specific answer. I'm sorry. I hope that was somewhat helpful. That's how I think about it. Okay, next we got Sil.
Hi, thank you so much. I have been looking a lot at my resume lately. I started off, my interest for law has always been there, but I started off thinking I wanted to go to law school for immigration law. But after an internship, I realized that that's not the path that I wanted to pursue, coming from an immigrant background
No,
myself.
I hate to hear that. As an immigrant,
I'm so sorry. It's just too close to home. I would always do it pro bono, but I think that that's not something I would dedicate my life to. However, in the process, I did realize my interest in tech law and privacy law. So I'm curious how you would approach that in your personal statement. Do you think it's worth mentioning that like turning point when I realized, oh, maybe immigration is not for me, maybe it's tech, that's a way that I can still help the community that I've always been so passionate about? Or perhaps should I keep it more open and not necessarily narrow it down to tech law or privacy law or IP? Wondering what your thoughts are on that, since my resume is like majority like nonprofit and immigration work, and then slowly towards my senior year, it was when I started realizing my interest in tech policy and tech law, and I'm doing something related to policy over the fall. So that's also something that I'm like trying to figure out how it's going to fit into my story.
Yeah. Okay. So I think without me knowing a lot of details other than what you said, I think the story of how you made that switch would be really interesting, because it sounds to me like you were pretty deep in the nonprofit kind of immigration stuff, and then something happened, you had some kind of realization that made you realize that the tech stuff was going to be a better use of your time and like more fulfilling. So I think exploring that and like writing it out would be a good place to kind of start. I think the thing I would really think about in this case is like, we want to make sure with the tone and the substance of this essay, I don't want to be talking about why not immigration law. I want to be making a case for the tech law stuff, if that makes sense. So more of an affirmative tone. It's like, I do want to do this, not I don't want to do this. And then that'll kind of speak for itself. I do think on the broader point of like, is it good to specify something? Yes, because like in law, you could be doing 1,000 different things, right? And so we want to have a general sense of vision as to like why you're going, what you want to do, how what you've done before feeds into that. So yeah, I think picking something specific is good. Yeah, I mean the specifics of this, I think you would probably want to sit down with someone kind of for a long period of time to figure it out. But I think where your head is in terms of kind of focusing on the why tech thing definitely makes sense.
Thank you.
Next, of course. Next, let's go. And I think we're getting short on time, so I'm just going to take these last two. But let's go with Hanania.
Yeah, hi. Thank you again for calling on me. I just wanted to ask, as to, I guess, your opinion as to whether, a senior year thesis, could potentially benefit, a student who's applying to law school, considering like the advent of like ChatGPT and all these other like self-writing programs. So yeah. Oh, and especially considering, if that's coupled with the fact that you don't have the highest GPA, or you don't have the GPA that you honestly want for a specific school.
Yeah. I'll say like a senior thesis is something, and I say this not to be harsh, but I think it's my number one job, to be honest. It is in the category of kind of extracurriculars that are fairly common. And so it's almost like table stakes. It is not necessarily going to add that much unless, and I think this is a big caveat, if it's something that you work really closely with a professor on who's going to write one of your recs, and then you produce this amazing paper, you go on to publish it somewhere, like you present somewhere, and the professor can say something along the lines of like, hey, we were, we worked really closely. He like demonstrated really amazing thoughtfulness and like this whole research process. Like that's something that can be a value add, because that's something that they can talk to in their letter. But just purely as a line on your resume, I wouldn't do it solely for the purpose of that, if that makes sense.
Okay, understood. So you're basically claiming that, unless the paper gets published, and unless like you're writing it with one of your professors who's writing a recommendation letter, it's not really as beneficial, correct?
Solely for the purpose of law school admissions. If it's something you care about and you want to do independent of that, like you should.
No, solely for law school.
Yeah, solely for like, is this going to help me get in on itself? No. If it ties into the letter of rec stuff, potentially.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Okay, of course. And Sav, start us off and close this out.
Thanks. Just hopefully a quick question here. I'm thinking about applying next cycle. So I was wondering when what you would recommend, like when someone like me should reach out to a coach like you on Leland, and if there's any reflective exercises or prep that you recommend someone should do in advance of seeing a coach to get the juices flowing or something.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Have you taken the LSAT yet?
I have, yeah.
Okay, huge. Okay, in that case, what I'd say, if you feel good about your score, I would say reach out to someone in, let's say, April, and that will give you more than enough time to get everything together. April of next year.
Okay.
So you got a lot of time.
Okay.
So meanwhile, I'd say just like keep doing the stuff you're doing in terms of like your extracurriculars, and I don't know, like honestly, we've been talking about this law school stuff the whole time. Like you guys should also like enjoy life.
Yeah.
Go do something you enjoy, go fall in love, like go help people. We have a big election this fall. There's a lot of important stuff to do. So if you have the test down, you feel good about it, yeah, feel free to reach out to anyone in April. In terms of getting prepared for that, generally with all the people on Leland, you have like an intro call where you have some of that familiarizing process. But honestly, I think you're pretty far ahead of things, and so I wouldn't stress too much about like what you need to do to get prepared for that. Obviously have a copy of your resume available, have some sense of the kind of schools that you're looking at, why you want to go, but it doesn't have to be this whole fully fleshed out product. That's what you're here to help with.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Of course. Okay, exciting time. I got the winner of our giveaway, and that person, I hope she's still here, drum roll, Christine Renice. You here?
Hi, yes, I'm here. Thank
Congrats,
you.
you won.
Was wondering if it's like possible if I can use this for like the next cycle application, or if it's not, then I'd be happily like I'd give it away to someone else. It's fine. Because
I'm going to defer to Amanda on our team. She works on the operations end to put this all together. I just kind of read out the name. Whatever she says, we will get to you.
We will be in touch, and if it ends up that it doesn't work out for you and it's not the right timeline, we will select another winner from our pool and reach out to them. But we will be in touch with you, Christine, and we can sort
all right. Okay. I'll also take the time to think about it then. All right. Thank you so much.
Of course.
All right, I have a quick question. Congratulations, Christine. I was wondering if you guys are picking winners based on the attendance, because I use my nickname, not my phone name, but just for future reference as well.
I think we just, it's a random draw that we anonymize and just kind of pick it on the back end. So, but independent of that, so if you guys are booking anything on Leland as a result of you guys coming to this, I have a discount that I'm putting out there that you guys can use. Feel free to, whenever you're checking something out, just use the Machmud-M.panel, and that will be 10% off of everything that you see. So hope you guys can utilize it. Hope this is helpful. And if you guys have any feedback for things that we can do differently, I try to do this about every month or so to a larger group just to get some of this info out there. So good luck. You're all going to do great. Most importantly, this is not the most important thing in the world. Make sure you like call your parents and be a good friend and try to make the world a better place. So that's what really matters. But okay, thank you for coming, and I'll see you guys soon. Have a good one.